Hi, and welcome to the session of our EpiDoc training program, for which you can see a link at the bottom of the screen. And in this session, Gabriel Bodar is going to talk about tagging names, personal names, and persons in EpiDoc. So please, Gabby.
Great, thank you, Irene. Yes, I'm going to talk about tagging names and persons. This is again is one of the optional features of tagging an EpiDoc edition, and the information about persons and names and so forth that might appear that you might tag in a corpus. I'm going to talk a few bits of background on this, a bit about the difference between prosopography and onomastics, a reminder of how authority lists might look, and then tagging those person references, tagging those names in the text, and then the indexing that enables. So just a reminder that when we talk about a person list, if we talk about a prosopography, properly speaking, we should be talking about structured data about historical persons, which might include biographical information or cursus honorum or similar information about a person that is structured in some way. It's sometimes referred to as a questionnaire. This is a structured list of information in a certain way. It's more than just a catalogue or a lexicon. It can have information about relationships between persons and relationships between other kinds of information, between records in different databases, between persons and places, between persons and events, other kinds of information, other kinds of controlled vocabularies. Not every person list is a prosopography, of course, but I'd like to think that if some of the features of this are included in there, then it has prosopographical features more than just, as I say, a lexicon would do. Onomastics then, an onomasticon is a lexicon. It's a lexicon of names. It may contain linguistic data, orthographic data. It may include standardized forms, so lemata or lemmatized forms in a sense of names. It may also include commentary on socio-historical, gendered, religious, and other elements of the names themselves. And it may handle particular historical naming conventions, such as tria nomina, patronymics, imperial titulature, other kinds of things that are unique to the kinds of names in your corpus, in your text, in your period and culture. Again, a quick reminder of the authority lists behind these. The authority list of persons, we've seen some examples of this in a previous presentation, but this is one example of how persons might be encoded. So I've got two examples in here. Each of them has names both in Greek and in English. They have a floruit, which has a range of possible dates. So in this case, it's not a range, but it could be a range. They might have an affiliation. They might have other information. They might have relationships to other persons and so forth. And several of these things could be linked to other authority lists. So the affiliation could be linked to your place authority list, for example, or to an external place authority list in the file. This is beginning to be prosopographical information rather than just a catalogue of persons, right? The authority list of names, however, is often very, very simple. It's just a set of identifiers and a set of the key information of it is what is the standard orthographic spelling of this name, right? And I've often found it very handy just because the orthographic spelling of a name is going to be unique anyway within this list, to also use that orthographic spelling as the identifier. Given that an XML identifier can be any Unicode string, it's fine to have the identifier for Ioannis to be Ioannis, even in Greek or whatever other Unicode script you want. So it makes it easy to tag from your text. You don't need to go to your authority list every time you find a name. You can just put the nominative of singular of that name in the ref that you're pointing from, in the nim ref that you're pointing from. Some people might, however, prefer to have their name have a set of arbitrary identifiers, as in this example, and point to them from there. This is particularly if your names can get complicated and and aren't always straightforward Unicode strings, and you don't want to have a single default form of it. The NIMREF, the NIM list can contain lots of other types of information as well, but the basic form is the form that I'm showing you here. It just has the base spelling given. That's all we really need from this authority list. Move on to the text then. So here's an example of a text. In case you, like me, are not terribly familiar with ornate Byzantine script, this is the transcription, and there is a name in here. The bit that we're interested in is simply Theodorou there near the end of that first line. Just a reminder that whatever encoding you put in your text anyway, so this is a slightly complex abbreviation which has 2 separate expansions in it, and it has 1 highlighted character. All of that markup is in there anyway, and you simply put your person name element around the existing markup. The person name element I like to gloss as being a name reference, a person reference. So this is a string that refers to a person. The attributes that this has been given, this has been given a type attribute, which I think is often quite useful because you may have several different kinds of person reference in your corpus. You might want to separate out people who are actually attested in your corpus from people who are mentioned, authors, deities, emperors, other officials who weren't actually anything to do with your corpus, but they're mentioned in it for external reasons. So they may appear in different name person catalogs, different prosopographies, rather than all being interspersed in the same one. If so, the type attribute is useful. And the ref attribute points to the XML ID in your person authority list that we saw earlier, and this points to person 2 or whatever. A slightly more complex example. This is something which is very, very common in Greek naming and Roman to a lesser extent. Is where a person's reference, so agate chiostes palkou, the person reference, that entire string is identifying Agate. Okay, it tells us who she is. However, that string contains another person reference to someone called Palkos, probably, and those therefore are nested because we don't want to tag Agate as one string and Palkos as a separate string, because Agate's string includes Palkos in there. It's not exactly a patronymic name, but it has patronymic purpose in this context. So the solution that I've often used is to nest one within the other. That can be slightly confusing in the sense that, if Palkos is her father, or possibly, her father in this case, then, or mother, because it's a genitive feminine there. Anyway, then it seems odd to say, Agate contains Palkos, but the name, Agate's full name includes the name of Palkos. So just a couple of examples of other kinds of names that you might tag. So we saw name type attested in the previous examples, but here's a name type divine, and this is a reference to Jupiter that can therefore be used to point to there from the ref attribute. And here's another name reference to Jesus that can be used to point to that. As a ruler. We have a reference to an emperor, so again, Maximinus might be the emperor used here, or another kind of ruler, King Alexios of somewhere, I forget where he was king of. So those are the various kinds of names you might want to tag, or person references you might want to tag in the text. Names are a slightly different phenomenon that you might want to tag as part of that same string. So again, we have this same purse name tagging Theodoru, but here instead of identifying what the person is, who the person is, which item in our person authority list we want to disambiguate this person as, the name element is simply telling us what is this person's name. And the reason this is useful, especially in an inflected language like Greek and Latin, is that Theodoru is not the person's name. The person's name is Theodoros. Okay, so it's a slightly different form of that name, and so the nimref points to the list nim that we saw in the earlier example for the authority list. And again, that nimref might be an arbitrary identifier rather than the same as the spelling of the nominative singular. Some of these historical features that we talked about, historical naming features, we got a name like Lucius Aelius Lamia. That's the Roman tria nomina. So we take each of those forms as a name. So there's one person reference, but there are three names. Okay, so we tag each of those as a separate name, and we can type them if we want. If we wanted, for example, to index them separately, we might want one index of praenomina, one index of gentilicia, one index of cognomina. So we could tag them in that way. And we could also, have a nimref pointing to the separate form in one or multiple name indexes, name authority lists for those types of names as well. Imperial titles then get quite interesting. The person reference, again, just tags the entire string. All of this is a reference to this one emperor. But that reference is made up of multiple names and of some words that are not names. Okay, like Pio and Feliki are words that you might want to find in your word index, not in your name index. For the sake of argument, I mean, you may disagree with me about Pius and Felix, but there will be words that appear, epithets and so forth, that should appear in the word index, or for example, for that matter, that should appear in your place index, if there's a place name as part of the imperial titles titulature. Some of these names, I mean, imperator is clearly a name by this period of imperial history, but it is also a word. You might want to find imperator in your word index. Augustus, again, has very clearly become a name. It's become it's used as a name. It's classified, I think, as a cognomen by this time, but it's also a word that you might find in the index, in the word index. It's a word that has a meaning, so you might want to tag it as both a word and a name. I mean, you're tagging it as whatever you want to index it as. Okay, and you make that decision. If you disagree with the way I've encoded this text, that's fine, because you're making a decision for your own corpus. As I say, if you want to index this particular string of characters in your prosopographical, in your person index, then tag it as a person reference. If you want to tag a particular substring within that as a name, index it in your onomasticon, then tag it as a name. Or if you want to use information in your person index, which is generated from lemmatized names, then you might want to use the name element to lemmatize those names against a nimref, even if you're not going to have an index based on your nim list, right? It could be used for other reasons. The lemmatized forms could be used in there. You can subdivide those names as much or as little as you think is appropriate, and you can categorize persons into different groups, into different authority lists, as much as you need to do so. Particularly useful in the cases of persons, but also names, and we've seen with some other kinds of authority lists like places and so forth, you can add other information to the authority list, and that might be because you want to display it that way in your index, or it might be because that information is useful for other reasons in there. So you can have information about that person's, dates and relationships and roles and titulature and other things in there as well. That, I think, is all we need to say about indexing and tagging names and persons. What anything to add, Irene?
No, it was great. Just important to consider the fact that yes, some features, some names could be a bit ambiguous, and it applies also to things like legion names and imperial titulature, it's not so easy to decide where to put them, where to index them. But yes, it's a decision that could be made inside each project according to the personal interpretation that anyone gives to them. So thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Other projects might come up with other categorization for organizing names. Yeah, great.
Great, thanks.
Cool, thank you.